The sharp scent of damp earth and pine needles cut through the morning air, a familiar comfort and a constant reminder of Alara Vance's solitary world. Her stomach, a hollow drum, rumbled softly, a sound she had grown accustomed to over the past 2 years. Sunlight, a pale yellow, filtered through the thick canopy of ancient oaks, dappling the forest floor in shifting patterns. She moved with practiced quiet, her worn deerskin clothing blending with the browns and greens of the whispering wilds. Each step was deliberate, her eyes scanning the undergrowth for the subtle signs of life she sought. A small patch of bluebell flowers caught her eye, but she bypassed them for the broad, serrated leaves of wild sorrel nearby. Its tartness would cut through the bland taste of dried roots she had for breakfast. Her fingers, nimble and stained from countless herbs, carefully plucked the leaves, feeling the cool dew still clinging to their surfaces. She imagined the faint metallic tang on her tongue, a small pleasure in a life defined by want. A whisper of wind stirred the branches above, carrying with it the distant murmur of the Shadowfen River. She heard the faint chirping of crickets, a tiny, resilient chorus. The silence of the forest was often profound, yet it was never truly empty. Every rustle, every snap of a twig held meaning. She listened, her senses finely tuned, a necessary skill for survival in this untamed territory. Her gaze drifted to the gnarled bark of a towering oak, its roots twisting like ancient serpents into the earth. She recalled the story of her grandmother, who believed these trees held the memories of the forest, whispering tales to those who knew how to listen. Alara often felt more kinship with the trees and the creatures than she ever had with her own kind. A faint, rhythmic thudding reached her ears, subtle at first, then growing more distinct. It was the heavy, coordinated steps of several individuals. Her muscles tensed, a familiar knot forming in her gut. She knew that sound too well. It was the cadence of a patrol, the organized march of her former clan. Her breath caught in her throat. She dropped to a crouch instantly, melting into the shadows of a dense thicket of ferns. Her heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She pressed herself against the cold, damp earth, holding still, barely breathing. The sound grew louder, accompanied by low, gruff voices. She recognized the tones, even if the words were indistinct. They were searching, always searching, ensuring their banishment remained absolute. A bitter taste filled her mouth, sharper than any wild sorrel. 2 years had passed since the elders cast her out, their faces grim, their voices cold. They had called her defiant, a danger to their traditions, all because she had refused to abandon an injured wolf pup found whimpering near their borders. She had simply seen a creature in pain, not a symbol of defiance. She clutched the small, smooth river stone she always carried, its coolness grounding here. It offered a small, silent comfort. The voices grew closer, then passed, their presence like a dark cloud drifting overhead. She heard the distinct crunch of their boots on the leaf litter, then the fading thuds as they moved deeper into the woods, following the deer trails. She waited, counting slowly to 100 in her mind, her body rigid with tension. Only when the last echo had vanished did she allow herself to fully exhale. Her shoulders slumped, the adrenaline slowly seeping out, leaving her trembling slightly. The anger, a familiar companion, simmered beneath her surface. How could they have been so blind? So cruel? Her only crime had been compassion, a trait they once praised in her as a healer. Now it was a curse. She slowly rose, her limbs stiff. The encounter had left her rattled, the gnawing loneliness of her exile intensified by the brush with her past. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that time would dull the ache of abandonment. It had not. The Whispering Wilds, beautiful as it was, remained a lonely prison. She continued her foraging, her senses heightened, the memory of the patrol a fresh wound. She collected wild garlic, its pungent aroma filling the air, and carefully dug for burdock root, known for its healing properties. The act of gathering, of connecting with the earth, always brought her a fragile sense of peace. It was a tangible purpose, a reason to keep going when the weight of her solitude threatened to overwhelm her. She filled her worn leather satchel, a patchwork of mended deerskin, with her finds. Suddenly a soft, high-pitched whimper reached her. It was thin, reedy, full of pain. Her head snapped up, her emerald eyes scanning the dense undergrowth. Another whimper, closer this time. It was an animal in distress. The sound cut through her lingering fear and anger, immediately drawing her. Her heart softened, the familiar pull of her innate compassion overriding all else. She pushed through a curtain of hanging moss, her steps silent, following the sound. There, nestled amongst a cluster of fallen logs, was a fawn. Its coat, dappled with white spots, was matted with mud and blood. One of its delicate front legs was twisted at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. The fawn trembled, its large, dark eyes wide with terror, reflecting the fear of a creature utterly helpless. It tried to push itself up, but the effort sent another wave of pain through its small body, eliciting another heart-wrenching cry. Ilara's breath hitched. A rush of protective instinct flooded her. This was what she was meant to do. This was her purpose, here in this lonely wilderness. She knelt slowly, careful not to startle the terrified animal. "Easy, little one," she murmured, her voice soft, a gentle hum against the rustling leaves. "It's all right. I won't hurt you." She kept her movements slow, deliberate, extending an open hand, palm up to show she carried no weapon. She watched the fawn's eyes, noting the slight tremor in its tiny nostrils. She reached for her satchel, carefully pulling out a small pot of healing salve, a roll of clean, thin bark strips for splinting, and some dried feverfew. The fawn flinched as she drew closer, its ears twitching nervously. Its small body vibrated with fear. She began to speak to it in hushed tones, words she had used countless times before, a soothing melody of reassurance. "You're safe now. I'm here to help. Just hold still, little one." She felt the deep, intrinsic connection, the unspoken language between healer and creature. Her fingers, usually so quick and precise, moved with extra tenderness as she examined the fawn's leg. The bone was clearly fractured. It would be a long, painful recovery, but not impossible. She felt a surge of resolve. She would do everything she could. She gently wiped away the mud and blood with a damp cloth she kept folded in her satchel, exposing the raw wound. The fawn let out a soft groan, but it did not try to struggle away from her touch. A fragile trust was beginning to form. She crushed the feverfew between her fingers, its bitter scent mingling with the earthy smell of the forest, and mixed it with water to form a paste. This she gently applied to the wound, hoping it would ease the pain. The fawn's eyes, though still wide, seemed to lose some of their frantic terror. Then she applied her homemade salve, a concoction of wild comfrey and plantain, known for mending bones and soothing flesh. The cool, thick ointment seemed to bring a small measure of relief. Ilara carefully set about splinting the broken leg. She used 2 strong, straight pieces of bark, wrapping them firmly but not too tightly with strips of soft deerskin. The fawn endured the process with surprising stillness, its breath coming in shallow pants. She could feel the fragile warmth of its small body against her hands, the rapid beat of its heart against her fingertips. She looked into its trusting eyes, and in that moment, the raw edges of her own pain seemed to recede, replaced by a profound sense of purpose. She spent the better part of the afternoon with the fawn, ensuring it was as comfortable as possible, giving it water from a small cup she carried. She watched as it eventually closed its eyes, a soft, exhausted sigh escaping its tiny muzzle. A small victory, a fleeting moment of peace in her turbulent existence. This was where she belonged, tending to the vulnerable, offering solace where she could. It was a stark contrast to the cold, hard judgment of her former clan. As the afternoon sun began to dip towards the western horizon, casting long purple shadows across the forest floor, Ilara knew she needed to seek shelter. The air was growing cooler, the promise of night settling in. She left the fawn nestled in a bed of soft moss, promising to return in the morning. A heavy sigh escaped her lips as she walked away, the sense of accomplishment mingling with the ever-present weight of her isolation. Her makeshift shelter was a small, hidden alcove beneath the roots of a giant sycamore, cleverly camouflaged with branches and leaves. It was barely large enough for her to lie down, but it offered protection from the elements and prying eyes. The last rays of sunlight flickered and died, plunging the forest into a deep twilight. The familiar chorus of night insects began their serenade, a backdrop to her thoughts. She peeled off her damp outer layer of clothing, shivering slightly as the chill seeped into her bones. She pulled a thin, worn blanket of woven furs around her, tucking it tightly. The silence pressed in on her, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. She closed her eyes, but sleep felt a long way off. Her mind replayed the day's events, the hunger, the patrol, the terrified fawn. Each memory was a thread in the tapestry of her solitary life. Her thoughts drifted to her former clan, the faces of those who had once been her family, now distant and disapproving. She remembered the pain in her mother's eyes, the sorrow she could not voice. She saw her father's stern, unyielding expression as he upheld the clan's ancient laws. The injustice of it all still burned, a dull ache beneath her ribs. She was only 24, yet she felt the weight of a lifetime's worth of solitude. Tears, hot and silent, pricked at her eyes. They rarely came these days, but tonight the encounter with the patrol had stirred them. She missed the warmth of a hearth, the familiar chatter of voices, the simple comfort of belonging. She missed her mother's gentle touch, her father's quiet strength. Most of all, she missed the sense of community, the knowing that she was not utterly alone in the vast, indifferent world. She curled tighter into a ball, drawing her knees to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. The sounds of the whispering wilds, usually so comforting, now seemed to amplify her isolation. Every rustle, every distant cry, seemed to underscore her aloneness. As night deepened, Ilara lay awake in her makeshift shelter, haunted by the memories of a life lost in the gnawing loneliness of her banishment. The biting wind whipped around the cold, dark stone of the Moonstone Citadel. It carried the scent of distant pine forests and the metallic tang of an unspoken dread. Inside, the great hall usually hummed with the steady pulse of a thriving pack, but now it throbbed with a frantic, desperate energy. Alpha King Kalen Thorne stood at the massive oak table, his broad shoulders hunched slightly, a map spread before him. His face, usually a mask of stoic command, was etched with lines of grim determination and a weariness that seeped into his very bones. His ice-chip eyes scanned the marked territories, each empty space on the parchment a fresh stab of fear in his heart. He felt the weight of every gaze in the room, the silent questions, the shared despair. Kalen ran a calloused finger over the swirling lines of the Shadowfen River, where Lyra had last been seen. Just a few days ago, the world had been vibrant, alive with her laughter. Now only a hollow echo remained. His chest ached with a pain so profound it felt as though his very spirit had been torn. He fought to keep his voice steady, to project the unwavering strength his pack relied upon. The northern patrols will push further into the Whispering Wilds, Kalen commanded, his voice a low growl that cut through the hushed murmurs. Every stream, every rock, every hidden hollow must be searched. We leave no stone unturned. He saw the fatigue in the eyes of his beta, Thomas, standing opposite him. Thomas simply nodded, his own face a reflection of the pack's collective sorrow. They were all searching, tirelessly, relentlessly, but each passing hour brought only more silence. Kalen felt a cold dread curling in his gut, a primal fear he usually suppressed with ease. This was different. This was Lyra. His mate, his queen, carrying their pup, was gone. The thought alone threatened to unravel him. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, the flickering torchlight dancing behind his eyelids. He saw her face framed by silver hair, her amber eyes sparkling with the joy that had always anchored his world. The soft scent of her, like sun-warmed earth and wild honeysuckle, seemed to brush against his memory, a cruel whisper of what he had lost. He remembered their last morning together. The crisp air had carried the promise of an early spring. Lyra had been in their chambers, her hands gently tracing the swell of her belly. She had smiled at him, a radiant, knowing smile that always melted the ice around his heart. "Our little one is eager to meet you, Kalen," she had whispered, her voice soft as a summer breeze. "I feel it in my bones." He had knelt before her, pressing his ear to her abdomen, feeling the faint, fluttering life within. A profound sense of peace had settled over him then, a quiet joy that promised a future full of warmth and laughter. He had kissed her forehead, promising to return before dusk. He had seen her walk towards the east gate, intending to visit the pack's healers for a routine check, her silver wolf form a magnificent blur against the morning light. That image, full of life and hope, was now a constant torment. Kalen opened his eyes, the memory fading like mist in the harsh light of his current reality. The fear in his chest tightened, a cold vice. He pushed the memory away, focusing on the immediate task. Despair was a luxury he could not afford. Not now, not while Lyra was out there, alone, vulnerable. A new scout, a young wolf named Finn, entered the hall, his face streaked with mud and exhaustion. His shoulders slumped, and he avoided Kalen's gaze. A wave of anger, sharp and potent, coursed through Kalen's veins. He knew what Finn's silence meant. "Report," Kalen demanded, his voice dangerously low, the sound cutting through the air like a blade. Finn flinched, his eyes darting nervously around the room before settling on Kalen's stern face. "Alpha King," he began, his voice hoarse. "We tracked her scent along the Shadowfen River, just as you ordered. It was faint, almost gone in places. We followed it for miles, past the old weeping willows, deep into the treacherous bends." He paused, swallowing hard. "The current was fierce, Alpha King. We found no sign of her. No fur, no tracks leading out of the river, no struggle on the banks, nothing." The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Nothing. Kalen's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He felt a tremor begin deep within him, a barely contained rage that threatened to erupt. He had ordered them to find something, anything. He needed a sign, a trace, a flicker of hope. "You mean to tell me," Kalen stated, each word clipped and precise, "that the Alpha Queen, my mate, simply vanished into thin air, into a river that even the pups know is dangerous, and you found nothing? No evidence of her ever being there, save for a faint, disappearing scent?" Finn bowed his head further, his hands clenching at his sides. "Alpha King, we searched. We risked the currents ourselves. We saw nothing. It was as if the river swallowed her whole, then washed away every single trace." Kalen took a step forward, his eyes narrowing to mere slits. The anger was a burning coal in his gut, fueled by helplessness and fear. He wanted to lash out, to roar his frustration at the heavens, at the cruel river, at the pack that seemed unable to bring him the one thing he desperately needed. He imagined Lyra struggling, calling out, the cold water dragging her down. The image ripped at his soul, tearing through his composure. He pounded his fist on the heavy oak table. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the tense silence of the hall. The map shuddered. The other pack members present recoiled slightly, sensing the raw edge of their alpha's fury. "Then you search again," Kalen bellowed, his voice rising, resonating with primal force. "And you keep searching until you find her, until you bring me something concrete. She is not gone. She cannot be. My mate, my queen, the mother of our future, does not simply disappear." His gaze swept over the assembled wolves, each one feeling the weight of his command, the unspoken threat in his tone. "Is that understood?" A chorus of "Yes, Alpha King" rumbled through the hall, tinged with fear and renewed determination. They knew his grief was vast, his patience thin. They knew the depth of his love for Lyra and the ferocity of his loyalty. Kalen turned away from the table, his eyes burning with unshed tears that he fiercely held back. He could not break. Not yet. He had to be strong for his pack, for Lyra. He walked out of the hall, the heavy oak doors closing behind him with a resonant thud, leaving the others to their renewed desperate efforts. The cold, unyielding silence of the Moonstone Citadel embraced him. He climbed the winding, narrow stairs to the highest ramparts, the cold moonstone rough beneath his hand. The chill air outside bit at his exposed skin, but he barely noticed. His mind was a tempest of fear and fury. He reached the summit, the vast, inky blackness of the night sky stretching above him, dotted with indifferent stars. Below, the sprawling Moonstone Kingdom lay silent, save for the distant, faint glows of search parties, tiny pinpricks of light in the overwhelming darkness. The wind howled past his ears, a mournful song that mirrored the ache in his heart. He looked out over his domain, a kingdom built on strength and tradition, yet utterly powerless against the whims of a treacherous river and a missing mate. His silver wolf pendant, the symbol of his lineage and his authority, felt heavy against his chest, a constant reminder of his burden. He pressed his palms against the cold, jagged stone of the rampart, feeling its unyielding strength, yet feeling himself crumbling within. A desperate image flashed before him. Lyra's amber eyes, wide with fear, as the river's current pulled her under. His breath hitched in his throat. He shook his head, trying to dislodge the image, replacing it with the sound of her laughter, the warmth of her hand in his. But the darkness encroached, the fear clawing at his resolve. He felt utterly alone, isolated by the immense responsibility and the profound grief. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for him to shatter, waiting for his pack to lose its anchor. He closed his eyes, his head thrown back, a single guttural sound escaping his lips. It began as a low moan, a deep, sorrowful vibration in his chest. Then it rose, gaining strength and volume, ripping through the cold night air. It was a sound born of pure, unadulterated anguish, a primal, desperate cry that tore from his very soul, echoing over the vast lands. It was a lament for his lost mate, a challenge to the cruel forces that had taken her, a desperate plea to the heavens. The mournful howl of the Alpha King, a raw testament to his profound loss and unwavering love, carried on the wind a beacon of despair cutting through the desolate night. It promised that he would never stop searching, no matter the cost or no matter the pain. He would find her. The air in Alara's makeshift shelter still held the chill of the long night. She shifted, her body stiff from the hard ground, the thin deer hide offering little comfort against the biting cold. A familiar ache settled in her stomach, a constant companion since her exile. She watched the first sliver of gray light filter through the dense canopy above, painting the ancient oak leaves in shades of silver. The whispering wilds were beginning to stir around her. A robin's tentative call pierced the quiet. Then another, a fragile symphony of awakening. Her thoughts, however, still clung to the loneliness that wrapped around her like a shroud. Each sunrise brought a fresh reminder of what she had lost: the family, the belonging, the simple warmth of shared laughter. A sudden, jarring sound tore through the peaceful dawn. It was a cry, sharp and ragged, not the familiar call of a wild animal, but something far more desperate. Her breath hitched. A shiver colder than the morning air ran down her spine. The sound came again, a mournful howl that ended in a choked gasp, followed by a frantic splashing. Her heart, so often burdened by quiet solitude, now began to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was not the distant cry of a hunter or the alarm of a cornered deer. This was pure, unadulterated distress, a plea for help. Alara pushed herself up, her weariness forgotten. The healer's instinct, buried deep but ever present, surged to the forefront. Every fiber of her being urged her toward the sound. She moved with practiced silence, her feet barely disturbing the fallen leaves and damp earth. The scent of pine and wet soil filled her nostrils as she wove through the ancient trees, her eyes scanning the forest floor for any sign, any track. The cries grew louder, more urgent, mingled now with the deep roar of rushing water. It was the Shadowfen River, she realized, a treacherous tributary known for its swift currents and hidden dangers. A cold dread coiled in her gut. The Shadowfen was unforgiving, claiming many lives, both animal and human, with its icy embrace. The trees began to thin, giving way to a dense tangle of weeping willows that lined the riverbank. The air grew heavy with moisture, and the roar of the water became a deafening wall of sound. Alara pushed aside a curtain of dripping branches, her emerald eyes widening at the sight before her. There, in the churning, murky water, was a large wolf, its silver-gray fur sleek with water, its powerful body struggling against the relentless current. It was caught, tangled in a monstrous net of roots that snaked out from an ancient, half-submerged tree trunk. One of its legs appeared trapped, and its head was barely above the water, its desperate gasps audible even over the river's roar. A wave of profound empathy washed over Alara, momentarily eclipsing her fear. The wolf's eyes, wide with panic, met hers for a fleeting second, a silent plea passing between them. She saw it struggle, the sheer raw will to survive, slowly failing. The current, strong and unforgiving, pulled at the animal, threatening to drag it fully beneath the surface. Each thrash of its powerful body seemed weaker than the last. She could see the fear, the exhaustion, the pain etched into its beautiful, desperate face. Her mind raced, calculating the risks. The Shadowfen River was notoriously cold, even in the warmer months, and the current here near the rapids was a death trap. She was alone, far from any help, and her own strength was limited. Her exiled status meant no one would come looking for her. If she failed, if the river claimed her too, she would simply disappear. Another forgotten soul swallowed by the Whispering Wilds. A ghost of a memory surfaced, the harsh words of her former clan, their condemnation of her compassion for a wounded wolf, the very act that led to her banishment. They had called her foolish, weak, unfit. But looking at the struggling creature, none of that mattered. The wolf's struggle was a mirror of her own, a solitary battle against an indifferent world. Its desperate whimpers pierced something deep within her, igniting a fierce, protective fire she rarely showed. Her heart ached with a familiar blend of sorrow and resolve. She could not, would not, stand by and watch a life slowly extinguish, not when she possessed even a sliver of hope to intervene. The thought of walking away, of leaving it to its fate, was a torment she simply could not bear. She cast a quick glance around. The bank was steep and slick with moss. There were no sturdy branches within reach, no vines strong enough to secure. This only path to the wolf was through the water itself. A cold shiver of apprehension ran through her, but it was quickly overshadowed by a surge of desperate determination. She thought of her hands, calloused from years of foraging and healing, hands that had brought comfort to countless creatures. Now they might be the only chance for this one. Without a second thought, Alara began to shed her outer tunic, her movements swift and precise despite the trembling in her fingers. The air felt like a frozen blade against her exposed skin. She took a deep, shuddering breath, filling her lungs with the damp, chilly air. The roar of the river seemed to intensify, a primal warning, but she ignored it. Her gaze remained fixed on the wolf, a silent promise forming in her mind. Then, with a resolve born of pure, unyielding compassion, Alara plunged into the icy depths of the Shadowfen River. The shock of the cold was immediate and brutal, stealing her breath, tightening her chest with an agonizing grip. It felt as though 1,000 needles pierced her skin, numbing her limbs instantly. The current seized her, tugging fiercely, threatening to drag her downstream before she could even reach her target. She gasped, a ragged cry escaping her lips as the frigid waters swirled around her, pulling at her clothes, trying to disorient her. She fought back instinctively, her powerful swimmer's strokes honed by years of navigating the wild rivers of her homeland before her exile. Her muscles screamed in protest against the biting cold and the relentless pull of the water. Her eyes, however, remained locked on the wolf, a beacon of desperate life in the churning chaos. The water was darker than she expected, murky with sediment, making it hard to gauge the depth or the hidden snags beneath the surface. She kicked hard, her legs burning, pushing against the unseen force of the river. The wolf, sensing her approach, thrashed even more violently, its large body a desperate struggle of fur and muscle against the roots and the current. Its panicked movements sent sprays of icy water into Alara's face, momentarily blinding her. She could feel the sharp chill of the water seeping into her bones, stealing her warmth, threatening to paralyze her. Each stroke was a battle, each breath a painful gasp of cold air. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, her outstretched hand brushed against the wolf's wet fur. It was surprisingly coarse and slick beneath her fingers. The animal let out a distressed whimper, its struggles intensifying, its powerful claws scraping against the submerged roots. Alara knew she had to act quickly before the wolf's fear or her own rapidly fading strength doomed them both. She gripped a large, gnarled root with one hand, anchoring herself against the current, and reached for the wolf with the other. The animal was heavy, its weight compounded by the water and its frantic movements. She felt its hot breath against her skin, a stark contrast to the numbing cold of the river. Its eyes, still wide with terror, stared into hers. She tried to offer a soothing murmur, a quiet promise of safety, but her voice was lost to the roar of the water and her own ragged breathing. The entanglement of roots was incredibly dense, binding the wolf's leg tightly. Alara plunged her hand into the freezing water, feeling blindly for the source of the constriction. Her fingers, already stiff with cold, fumbled against the slimy, unyielding wood. The wolf let out a pained growl as she tried to free its limb, its powerful body twisting in desperation. Its sharp teeth, though not directed at her, were terrifyingly close. She felt the danger, the primal fear that could turn the grateful animal into a desperate, attacking wild one. But she pushed the fear aside. She focused on the problem, the trapped limb, the relentless current, the life rapidly draining from the magnificent creature. She worked with a quiet intensity, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The cold was an agony, a constant gnawing presence that threatened to steal her senses. Her fingers were becoming numb, her muscles screaming with the effort. Each surge of the current felt like a giant hand trying to tear her away, to rip the wolf from her grasp. She could feel the wolf's heart pounding against her arm, a desperate drumbeat of life struggling against the odds. Its heavy fur absorbed water, making it feel even heavier, a dead weight threatening to drag her down into the murky depths. She knew she could not hold on much longer. Her own body was beginning to tremble uncontrollably, a deep, shuddering cold radiating from her core. The effort was immense, far more than she had anticipated, far more than her solitary life in the wilds had ever demanded. Ilara grappled with the thrashing wolf, the river's cold embrace threatening to pull them both under, her strength waning rapidly. The searing cold of the Shadowfen River still clung to Ilara, even as her bare hands dug into the muddy bank. Her lungs burned with the effort, each breath a ragged gasp tearing through her throat. The heavy, lifeless weight of the enormous wolf pressed against her, its silver-gray fur slick with river water and clinging debris. She had no memory of how she found the last surge of strength, only the desperate, primal need to pull them both from the water's dark embrace. Her muscles screamed in protest, trembling uncontrollably, but she dragged the wolf a few more feet away from the immediate threat of the current. The bank was a narrow strip of uneven ground, littered with sharp stones and tangled roots. Ilara collapsed beside the animal, her own body shivering violently, every bone aching. The chill seeped into her very marrow, a deep, persistent cold that made her teeth chatter uncontrollably. She lay there for a moment, simply existing, trying to quiet the frantic drumming of her heart and catch her breath. The sound of the rushing river filled her ears, a constant, menacing roar that echoed the chaos she had just escaped. Above them, the sky was a bruised purple, fading quickly into twilight, painting the weeping willows in stark, skeletal silhouettes. Finally, a faint, shallow breath from the wolf stirred her. Ilara pushed herself up, her limbs heavy and reluctant. She crawled closer, her movements stiff and clumsy, and placed a trembling hand on the wolf's side. Its fur was cold, its skin clammy, but there was a faint, steady rise and fall to its chest. It was alive. A wave of profound, aching relief washed over her, momentarily eclipsing the cold and exhaustion. Her fingers moved gently over the wolf's powerful frame, searching for any obvious injuries beyond the scrapes and bruises from its struggle. The animal was magnificent, even in its unconscious state. Its coat, thick and lustrous even when matted with mud, spoke of strength and lineage. Its paws were unusually large, its build robust, far grander than any wild wolf she had ever encountered in the Whispering Wilds. Ilara's trained eyes scanned its body. There were no gaping wounds, no broken bones that she could discern. She ran her hands along its ribs, feeling the rhythm of its breathing, slow but steady. A soft, almost imperceptible whimper escaped the wolf's lips, a sound that pulled at something deep inside Ilara. She whispered reassuring words, soft and low, a comfort for herself as much as for the animal. As she moved her hands down its belly, her breath hitched. The wolf was heavily pregnant. The rounded, swollen abdomen was unmistakable, a clear curve beneath the wet fur. Her fingers froze, a sudden rush of understanding washing over her. This was not just a wolf. This was a mother carrying new life. Her heart gave a curious lurch, a mix of awe and a renewed sense of urgency. The stakes had suddenly become immeasurably higher. She had saved 2 lives, not one. A faint warmth began to spread through Ilara as she processed this. She had always found comfort in nurturing, in the fragile promise of new life. This discovery deepened her connection to the creature lying before her. A protective instinct, fierce and unexpected, surged through her weary body. She would not let this mother and her pups perish, not after she had fought so hard to bring them to safety. Ilara carefully shifted her position, mindful of the wolf's delicate state. She needed to clear the mud from its airways, check its eyes, and ensure its breathing remained unhindered. The water was receding from its fur, leaving behind a gritty layer of mud and river silt. She used the hem of her soaked deerskin tunic, tearing a strip of the well-worn fabric, to gently wipe the mud from the wolf's face and neck. The fabric, once soft, felt rough against the sensitive skin. Her fingers worked with the practiced ease of a healer, accustomed to tending to injured creatures. She cleaned the matted fur around its muzzle, then moved to its throat, where a thicker layer of mud had caked. As she carefully brushed away the grime, her fingertips brushed against something hard and unyielding beneath the matted fur. It was a collar. Alara paused, her hand hovering. Collars on wild animals were rare, almost unheard of, unless the animal belonged to a human settlement. But this wolf was no domestic creature. Its sheer size and wild spirit were undeniable. Her brow furrowed in confusion. She continued to clear the mud, trying to get a better look. The collar was made of dark, sturdy leather, partially obscured by the wolf's thick, wet mane. Her fingers traced the outline of the leather, firm and well-crafted. She felt a cold, smooth object embedded within it. Curiosity, a rare luxury in her solitary existence, prickled at her. With gentle persistence, she worked to dislodge the remaining mud, pulling back the heavy fur that concealed the object. Slowly, painstakingly, the dark, almost black moonstone began to emerge, reflecting the last vestiges of the fading light with a faint internal glow. Alara's breath caught in her throat. The stone was large, polished, and breathtakingly beautiful. But it was not just the stone that held her gaze. Etched into its smooth surface, clear and undeniable now that the mud was gone, was an intricate crest. A rearing wolf, powerful and proud, stood beneath a graceful crescent moon. The symbol was unmistakable. It was the crest of the Thorn Pack, the royal symbol of the Moonstone Kingdom. Her hands stilled completely. The cold that had been seeping into her bones suddenly intensified, not from the river's chill, but from a profound internal dread. Her heart, which had just begun to calm, now hammered against her ribs with violent force, a frantic bird trapped within a cage. Every beat echoed in her ears, deafening out the sound of the river, the rustling leaves, everything but the terrifying truth unfolding before her eyes. The Thorn Pack, the Alpha King, the Moonstone Citadel. These were names of power, of authority, of a world she had been brutally cast out from. She had heard tales of their ferocity, their unwavering loyalty, their relentless pursuit of any who dared to cross them. And now, lying unconscious beside her, wearing their royal crest, was one of their own. This was no ordinary wolf. This was a direct, irrefutable link to the very heart of the kingdom that despised her. A kingdom that had no place for an exiled healer like her. Her mind raced, a torrent of chaotic thoughts. Why was a wolf bearing the royal crest of the Thorn Pack in the Shadowfen River? So far from the Moonstone Citadel, and pregnant, no less. A cold, sickening realization began to dawn upon her, chilling her blood more effectively than the river ever could. Whispers and rumors traveled even to the furthest reaches of the Whispering Wilds. The Alpha King Kalen's beloved mate, the Alpha Queen Lyra, was pregnant. She had been missing for days, her disappearance plunging the Moonstone Kingdom into a frantic, desperate search. Alara's fingers, still resting on the collar, felt numb. The silver-gray fur, the powerful build, the elegant grace even in unconsciousness. It all fit. The wolf she had pulled from the jaws of death, the animal she had cradled and whispered to, was Lyra Thorn, the Alpha Queen. The sheer magnitude of this truth threatened to overwhelm her. She had unknowingly saved the mate of the most powerful alpha in the lands, the very queen whose disappearance had set the entire region on edge. A shiver, not of cold but of pure terror, ran down her spine. Her heart pounded, a frantic, desperate rhythm that made her whole body tremble. She, Alara Vance, the exiled, the outcast, who survived on the fringes of society, now held the life of the Alpha Queen in her hands. The royal moonstone, still partially obscured by a few clinging strands of mud, seemed to pulse with a faint, ominous light, like a trapped star. It was a beacon, a declaration of identity, and a potential death sentence. What would the Alpha King do if he found her with his mate? Would he believe her story of rescue? Or would he see an exiled outcast, a potential threat, and unleash his fury upon her? Her past experience with her own rigid clan offered little hope. They had banished her for simply protecting a lone injured wolf. Saving the alpha queen, keeping her hidden even for a moment, could be construed as abduction, as defiance, as an act worthy of the harshest punishment. Her mind reeled with the implications. This was not a small, injured fawn. This was the most important figure in the Moonstone Kingdom, pregnant with the future heir. Her act of pure, selfless mercy, born from a lifetime of compassion, had inadvertently entangled her in a web of royal intrigue and unimaginable danger. The silence of the forest seemed to press in on her, suddenly heavy with unseen eyes and unspoken threats. The air, once filled with the fresh scent of pine and damp earth, now carried a faint, coppery tang, the taste of fear in her mouth. Alara stared at the royal moonstone, her heart pounding in her chest, realizing she had unknowingly saved the Alpha Queen, a truth that could either condemn or save her. Alara's muscles screamed with protest, each movement a fresh agony. The unconscious wolf felt like a mountain of fur and bone, heavier than anything Alara had ever carried. Her breath hitched in ragged gasps as she dragged Lyra away from the Shadowfen River's treacherous bank, the icy water still clinging to her clothes. Every rustle in the dense undergrowth, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of raw fear through her. She was not merely moving an injured animal. She was relocating the Alpha Queen, a being whose disappearance had plunged an entire kingdom into a desperate search. The moonstone collar, cold and smooth against Lyra's neck, seemed to pulse with a silent accusation. Alara knew the weight of this truth. Her own exile had taught her the harshness of justice, or what passed for it, in the wolf clans. To harbor a queen, especially one so fiercely sought, was an act of treason. Yet, looking at the silent pregnant form, a primal protectiveness surged within her, drowning out the fear. Abandoning Lyra was not an option. It felt like a betrayal of her own soul. Alara scanned the darkening forest, her emerald eyes darting through the ancient oaks and tangled vines. She needed a place hidden, a sanctuary far from human paths in wolf patrols. The Whispering Wilds, her reluctant home, held many secrets, deep caves and shadowed hollows. She remembered a place, a small grotto she had discovered years ago, tucked away behind a waterfall, its entrance obscured by thick, weeping moss. It would be difficult to reach, a challenge for even a healthy wolf, let alone an unconscious, heavily pregnant. The thought of moving Lyra through that rugged terrain made Alara's stomach clench. Her arms and legs already felt like lead. She bent low, grunting with effort, trying to find a better grip on Lyra's substantial form. The wolf's fur was damp and matted, smelling faintly of river water and wild earth. Alara focused on the rhythm of her own breathing, one step, then another. The air grew colder as night fully descended, painting the forest in shades of gray and black. Hours seemed to stretch into an eternity. Alara pulled, pushed, and guided Lyra's heavy body over fallen logs, around thorny bushes and across slippery rocks. Her hands became raw, scraped and bleeding in places. A sharp pain shot through her left shoulder, a familiar ache from an old injury, but she ignored it. Her focus remained solely on the wolf, on the slow, deliberate progress towards the hidden grotto. The thought of the pup, vulnerable and unseen within Lyra, spurred Alara onward. Finally, a faint, muffled roar reached her ears, the sound of falling water. Hope, a fragile, desperate thing, bloomed in her chest. She pushed through a dense curtain of ivy, her heart pounding, and there it was, the waterfall, a shimmering veil of silver in the dim light. Behind it, a dark opening promised shelter. The air grew immediately cooler and damper near the water, carrying the scent of mineral earth and wet stone. Alara knew the path into the cave was narrow and required careful maneuvering. She took a deep, shuddering breath, then began the arduous task of guiding Lyra through the watery curtain and into the hidden space. The rock underfoot was slick, and Alara's boots slipped once, sending a fresh wave of panic through her. She regained her footing, holding Lyra close, murmuring reassurances to the silent animal. "Almost there, almost safe," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her dry mouth. Inside, the cave was small but surprisingly dry, a natural chamber carved into the rock. The air was still, a quiet haven from the wind that now rustled through the trees outside. Alara gently lowered Lyra onto a patch of soft, sandy earth, her own legs buckling beneath her. She collapsed beside the wolf, chest heaving, the adrenaline slowly draining from her body. A wave of profound exhaustion washed over her, making her eyelids heavy. She forced herself to move, to crawl over to her satchel, which she had carefully kept strapped to her back throughout the ordeal. Her fingers, stiff and trembling, fumbled with the leather straps. She pulled out a small, dried oil lamp and a flint, her movements slow and deliberate. A spark, then a tiny flame flickered to life, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. The light was weak, but it was enough. It offered a sliver of comfort in the overwhelming darkness. Alara's gaze returned to Lyra. The wolf lay utterly still, her breathing shallow but steady. The moonstone collar gleamed softly in the lamplight, a stark reminder of Lyra's identity and Alara's perilous secret. Alara carefully touched Lyra's flank, feeling the warmth of her fur, the gentle rise and fall of her belly. The pup was still there, still clinging to life. This observation brought a wave of relief so intense it almost made her weep. First, Alara needed to warm Lyra. The river's cold had seeped deep into the wolf's bones. She searched the cave floor, finding a few flat, palm-sized stones. She gathered some dry moss and tiny twigs from a sheltered crevice near the cave entrance, careful to make sure nothing would produce too much smoke. With practiced ease, she coaxed a small, smokeless fire to life in a shallow depression, placing the stones near the embers to heat. The warmth was minimal, but it was something. While the stones warmed, Alara opened her satchel again, retrieving her collection of herbs. Her hands, despite their raw state, moved with an almost surgical precision. She gently examined Lyra, her fingers tracing over the wolf's powerful limbs, feeling for any broken bones, any deep gashes. There were scrapes and bruises, some deep, from being battered against rocks entangled in roots. Her focus was sharp, her mind entirely on the task of healing. She found a small clay pot containing a thick, earthy salve made from comfrey and plantain. This she carefully rubbed on to Lyra's larger wounds, the cool paste seeping into the fur and skin. "This will help with the pain, my dear," Alara murmured, her voice a soft, low hum in the quiet cave. She spoke instinctively as she always did to injured animals, offering comfort and reassurance even when she knew they could not understand her words. The act of speaking broke the tense silence, making the small space feel a little less lonely. Next, Alara gently worked a few drops of a calming herbal tincture, made from valerian root and chamomile, onto Lyra's gums. She hoped it would ease any internal discomfort and help the wolf rest more deeply. Her touch was feather-light, almost reverent, as if Lyra were the most delicate creature she had ever encountered. The responsibility felt immense, a heavy cloak draped over her shoulders. She was not just tending to a wolf, she was tending to a queen, a mother, the future of a powerful lineage. The stones were warm now, radiating a comforting heat. Alara carefully wrapped two of them in layers of soft moss and placed them gently against Lyra's flanks, hoping to draw out the deep chill. She covered Lyra with her own cloak, a thick woolen garment that usually served as her only blanket. The cave was still cold, but the combined efforts created a small pocket of warmth around the unconscious wolf. Alara sat back on her heels, watching, waiting, her eyes never leaving Lyra's face. A profound weariness settled over Alara. Her body ached from head to toe, and her mind felt stretched thin, taut with worry and the weight of her secret. She thought of her own clan, the harsh faces of the elders who had banished her for her compassion. They would call this madness, a suicidal folly. To them, wolves were threats, not beings deserving of care. Yet Alara saw no difference between Lyra and the injured fawn she had comforted just yesterday. All living things deserve kindness, especially when vulnerable. The silence in the cave pressed in on her, broken only by the gentle crackle of her tiny fire and Lyra's shallow breaths. Alara leaned against the rough cave wall, pulling her knees to her chest. Her thoughts drifted, a swirling mix of fear, hope, and a strange sense of destiny. She was a solitary figure, cast out and forgotten, yet now she held the fate of a queen and her unborn pup in her trembling hands. The irony was not lost on her. Her simple act of mercy at the river had twisted her solitary life into a perilous, unforeseen path. Alara knew the risks. If Kalen, the Alpha King, found her with his mate, he might not see her as a savior. He might see her as a kidnapper, an enemy, a witch who had lured his queen away. The image of Kalen, stern and powerful, his eyes like chips of ice, flashed in her mind. She had heard tales of his ruthless justice, his unwavering protection of his pack. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. A shiver ran down Alara's spine, not from cold, but from the chilling prospect of facing the Alpha King's wrath. But then her gaze fell back to Lyra, to the soft rise and fall of her belly, and the fear receded, replaced by a fierce determination. She could not, would not, abandon this creature. Her moral compass, sharpened by years of isolation and self-reliance, pointed her towards protection, towards nurturing. She found herself whispering again, her voice barely audible above the gentle murmur of the waterfall outside the cave entrance. "You are safe here, Queen Lyra," she murmured, stroking the soft fur along Lyra's neck. "No harm will come to you or your little one." The words were for Lyra, but they were also for herself, a way to anchor her courage, to remind herself of her purpose. She felt a connection to this unconscious wolf, a strange, profound bond forged in the crucible of shared danger and profound vulnerability. The scent of damp earth and pine filled her nostrils, grounding her. She closed her eyes for a moment, picturing the vast, dark forest outside, the patrols searching, the Alpha King consumed by his grief. All of it felt distant, unreal, compared to the immediate, tangible reality of the unconscious wolf beside her. Her life, once so simple in its hardship, had become impossibly complicated, woven into the fabric of a royal drama she had never sought. Alara stretched her cramped limbs, wincing at the dull ache in her back. She needed rest, but sleep felt impossible. Her mind raced, planning for the days ahead. She would need water, food, more herbs. How long would Lyra need to recover? What would happen when she woke? These questions buzzed around her like angry wasps, stinging at her fragile peace. She pushed them away, focusing instead on the present moment, on the steady warmth of Lyra's body beneath her cloak. Hours passed in this quiet vigil. The tiny fire dwindled to embers, its warmth fading. Alara periodically checked the stones, reheating them when necessary, making sure Lyra remained as comfortable as possible. Her own body screamed for sleep, but she fought against the urge, her eyes glued to Lyra, searching for any sign of change. The weight of her secret pressed down on her, a physical burden. She was alone, utterly alone with this monumental truth. The cave air grew heavy with the scent of pine and faint medicinal herbs. Alara shifted, trying to find a more comfortable position against the cold, hard rock. Her emerald eyes, though tired, remained sharp, constantly assessing Lyra's state. She noticed a subtle twitch in Lyra's ear, a slight shift of her paw. A flicker of hope, hot and bright, ignited in Alara's chest. Was it a dream, a deep sleep, or something more? Her heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She leaned closer, holding her breath, her gaze fixed on the wolf's face. Another tremor ran through Lyra's body, a soft whimper escaping her lips. Alara's breath hitched in her throat. This was it. The moment she had dreaded, yet also longed for, was upon her. What would the Alpha Queen do when she awoke to find herself in a stranger's care, in a hidden cave, far from her mate and her pack? Lyra's eyelids fluttered, a slow, deliberate movement. Alara watched, mesmerized, her own body tensing with anticipation. The moment seemed to stretch, suspended in the quiet air of the cave. Then slowly Lyra's amber eyes opened fully. They were dull at first, unfocused, searching the dim confines of the grotto. Then they landed on Alara's face, wet and clear, holding a mixture of confusion and something else, something deep and ancient. Alara felt the impact of that gaze, a silent question, a profound acknowledgement. Her own emerald eyes met Lyra's, and for a long, breathless moment, no sound was made. There was no fear in Lyra's eyes, no aggression, only a profound stillness. A silent, unspoken understanding passed between the two unlikely souls, a connection forming in the shadows of the cave, binding Alara to the secret she now held even tighter than before. The Alpha Queen was awake. The air within the Moonstone Citadel pressed down on Kalen, a heavy blanket woven from days of fruitless searching and the raw fear of his people. Weeks had blurred into a monotonous cycle of hope extinguished and rekindled, each sunrise a fresh promise, each sunset a deepening shadow. He paced the war room, the map of the Whispering Wilds spread across the table like a challenge, its green expanse mocking his relentless efforts. His patrols, once confined to the immediate borders, now reached deeper and deeper into the wild, a desperate tendril stretching through ancient trees and winding paths. Each morning before the first light touched the peaks, he would dispatch his trackers, their faces etched with the same wariness that shadowed his own. Their reports were always the same. No clear signs, no scent that held, no definitive tracks. Yet Kalen pushed them harder. He pushed himself harder still. His voice, usually a calm, resonant command, grew hoarse from shouting orders, from urging his pack to go beyond their limits. The aggression in their search was not born of malice, but of a shared, gnawing terror that something terrible had befallen their Alpha Queen. They tore through underbrush, their trained noses sifting through the countless scents of the forest, hoping for a trace of Lyra. They knew the Whispering Wilds were Alara's domain, a place of exile for some, a sanctuary for others. But for Kalen's pack, it was just another vast, indifferent expanse that swallowed their beloved queen. Kalen could feel the shift in his pack, a subtle change from disciplined resolve to a more primal, almost frantic energy. Their movements were less precise, driven by a raw instinct to find what was lost, no matter the content. He saw it in their eyes, the glint of desperation that mirrored his own. The Moonstone Kingdom, usually a beacon of strength and order, now hummed with a muted anxiety. The hearths burned lower, the laughter was softer, and the children played closer to their parents. The absence of Lyra, her gentle spirit, her comforting presence, created a void that no amount of Kalen's stern leadership could fill. He heard the whispers of his people, the hushed prayers for her safe return, and each one was a fresh wound to his heart. He carried the weight of their sorrow, adding to his own unbearable grief. Elder Silas, his counsel wise and steady, often found Kalen staring out from the citadel's ramparts, his gaze fixed on the distant, dark line of the Whispering Wilds. "You cannot break yourself, Kalen," Silas would say, his voice soft as rustling leaves. "Your pack needs your strength, not your despair." Kalen would only his jaw clenched, his eyes never leaving the horizon. He felt a constant, dull ache in his chest, a hollow space where Lyra's warmth used to be. Every bird call sounded like a cry of warning, every rustle of leaves like a whisper of her name. He slept little, haunted by dreams of her laugh, her soft touch, her intelligent amber eyes. When he did sleep, it was a restless, fitful state, his wolf form pacing the edge of a deep, shadowed abyss. One dawn, as the first sliver of orange painted the sky, Kalen felt a peculiar pull. It was not a scent nor a sound, but a feeling deep within his bones, a sudden, sharp clarity amidst the fog of his grief. It was a premonition, a flicker of instinct that urged him toward a specific direction, the Shadowfen River. He had sent patrols there before, and they reported nothing but the relentless current and a few scattered tracks of small animals. Yet this feeling was undeniable, a persistent tug at his very core that overruled logic and previous failed searches. He knew it was Lyra. He knew it. He gathered a smaller, elite tracking team, choosing only those whose senses were as sharp as his own, whose movements were as silent as the falling snow. Their faces were grim, but a spark of renewed hope ignited in their eyes when Kalen announced his decision to lead them himself. They understood the significance. If the Alpha King was going, it meant he felt something, sensed something. They moved like shadows through the dense forest, their forms blending with the dappled, light, dappled, and dark. Each step was measured, each breath controlled. Kalen's senses were heightened, straining to catch any deviation from the ordinary, any scent that spoke of his mate. The air grew cooler as they approached the river, carrying the damp scent of earth and ancient water. The murmur of the Shadowfen River grew louder with every passing moment, a low, constant hum that resonated with the frantic rhythm of Kalen's heart. He felt it thrumming against his ribs, a wild drumbeat of anticipation and dread. He remembered Lyra's words, a faint echo from a time that felt like a lifetime ago. She loved the river, its wildness, its untamed spirit. He had warned her about its treacherous currents, but she had only laughed, her eyes sparkling with adventure. The memory was a sharp, painful jab. He pushed it down, focusing on the hunt. The ground beneath his boots changed, or becoming softer, muddier, until they reached the banks of the Shadowfen. The river flowed before them, wide and unforgiving, its murky waters churning with a restless energy. Weeping willows lined the banks, their branches drooping low, their leaves a muted green against the gray sky. A profound silence fell over the tracking team. They fanned out, their eyes scanning the tangled roots, the damp earth, every rock and crevice. Kalen walked slowly along the bank, his gaze sweeping over the debris caught in the roots, the overturned stones, the patches of disturbed mud. He inhaled deeply, trying to discern any scent that was not purely forest, not purely river. His heart hammered, a frantic bird trapped in his chest. He felt an agonizing blend of terror and a fragile, desperate hope. What if she was here? What if she was not? The thought of finding nothing, of this premonition leading to another dead end, was almost unbearable. He knelt by a patch of moss, running his fingers over it, feeling the damp coolness. Nothing. He rose, his muscles aching, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. Then his eyes caught something. A splash of color, a dark, rich blue stark against the drab browns and greens of the riverbank. It was small, barely visible, caught on a gnarled root that dipped into the water. His breath hitched in his throat. He moved towards it, his steps slow, deliberate, as if rushing might make it vanish. His companions watched him, sensing the shift in his demeanor, the sudden, terrible focus. He reached the root, his hand trembling slightly as he pulled the piece of fabric free. It was a small scrap, no larger than his palm, torn at the edges, slightly damp and crusted with a thin layer of river mud. But there was no mistaking the rich indigo of the fabric, a color Lyra favored for her traveling cloaks. His fingers closed around the cloth, crushing it slightly. A wave of emotions, hot and cold, washed over him. Hope, sharp as a blade, pierced through his despair. She had been here. This was hers. But terror, cold and paralyzing, followed immediately. Why was it discarded? Was it torn off in a struggle? Had she been injured? Had the river taken her? He could feel the fine weave of the fabric, the softness that reminded him of her touch, her hair. He brought the scrap closer to his face, inhaling deeply. A faint, sweet scent, undeniably Lyra's, mingled with the earthy dampness of the river. It was her. The scent was faint, almost gone, but it was there, a ghost of her presence that filled his lungs and constricted his throat. His eyes burned with unshed tears, a fierce ache building behind them. A low, guttural sound rumbled from his chest, a sound that was half growl, half sob. His hands clenched into fists, the small piece of fabric trapped within his grasp, a tangible connection to his lost mate. He stood frozen for a long moment, the world narrowing to this one small torn piece of cloth. He was closer than ever. The premonition had been right. He felt a surge of raw, untamed protectiveness, a primal fury awakening within him. No longer was this a search, it was a hunt. He would find her. He would tear apart every inch of these cursed wilds if he had to. He would find anyone who had dared to harm her. Kalen lifted his head, his ice-blue eyes, once clouded with grief, now burned with a terrifying, singular purpose. He held the scrap of fabric to his nose once more, letting the faint, precious scent fill him, giving him strength, giving him direction. A primal growl rumbled deep in his chest, a sound born of fierce love and desperate fury, echoing the untamed spirit of his wolf. He was convinced he was closer than ever before, his gaze sweeping the wild, unforgiving landscape with an unshakable, fierce determination. The week began as a quiet vigil, each new day a testament to life's stubborn will. Alara watched the Alpha Queen, Lyra, with a healer's careful eye, noting every small shift. The wolf's breathing grew steadier, her amber eyes losing their haunted, distant glaze. The cold dampness of the cave still clung to the air, but Alara kept a small, controlled fire burning, its smoke curling upwards and out through a narrow fissure she had discovered. The warmth was a balm against the chill, a small comfort in their hidden sanctuary. Alara moved with a soft tread, her deerskin leggings silent against the packed earth floor. She applied fresh salves to the scrapes on Lyra's legs, a mixture of comfrey and yarrow that smelled faintly of the forest floor. At first, Lyra would flinch, a low rumble vibrating in her chest. Alara would stop, pull back her hand, and speak in soothing whispers. "It is all right, my queen," she would murmur, though the words felt strange and heavy on her tongue. "Just rest, just heal." Slowly and perceptibly, the resistance softened. Lyra's muscles, once rigid with suspicion, began to relax under Alara's touch. The wolf would watch Alara prepare her meager meals of dried berries and smoked fish, her gaze steady, unblinking. Alara would offer her water from a cupped leaf, holding it patiently until Lyra lapped at it, her tongue soft against Alara's fingers. Each accepted touch, each moment of peaceful coexistence, was a tiny thread woven into a growing tapestry of trust. Alara often found herself talking to Lyra, sharing stories of the whispering wilds, tales of the small, resilient creatures she had encountered. She spoke of the mischievous squirrels, the silent deer, the patient owls that watch from ancient trees. Lyra would listen, her head often resting on her eyes half closed. There was a profound quiet in the cave, broken only by the crackle of the fire, the distant whisper of the wind in Alara's soft voice. It was a stark contrast to the clamor of her former clan, the constant, watchful eyes, the sharp judgments. Here, with Lyra, there was only acceptance. The loneliness that had been her constant companion since exile began to recede, replaced by a different kind of quietude. It was a silence filled with unspoken understanding, a shared vulnerability. Alara's heart, long a guarded fortress, felt a tiny crack appear, allowing a sliver of warmth to seep in. She found herself smiling more often, a genuine, unburdened curve of her lips that she had not seen in a mirror for years. The royal moonstone collar remained on Lyra's neck, a stark reminder of the wolf's true identity and the immense danger Alara now faced. But Alara had learned to look past the gleaming stone, past the crest of the thorn pack. She saw only the struggling, vulnerable creature she had pulled from the river, the mother-to-be whose life now depended on Alara's care. The weight of the secret was immense, a crushing pressure on her soul, yet she could not regret saving Lyra. One afternoon, as Alara sorted through her herbs, humming a forgotten lullaby, Lyra shifted. She rose from her bed of moss and dry leaves, stretching her powerful limbs. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she approached Alara. Her nose, cool and damp, nudged Alara's hand, then her forearm. It was a gentle insistence, a silent request. Alara paused, her heart giving a nervous flutter against her ribs. She lowered her hand, palm open, and Lyra leaned into it, her soft fur brushing Alara's skin. Then Lyra's head dipped, her gaze fixing on Alara's waist. With another soft nudge, she pushed her nose against Alara's side, then guided Alara's hand ever so gently towards her swollen belly. Alara's breath hitched. This was an invitation, a profound act of trust. Her fingers, stained green from herbs, trembled slightly as she hesitated. The smooth, lustrous fur felt warm beneath her touch. She traced a slow, careful path across Lyra's side, feeling the tautness of the skin, the unmistakable curve of life growing within. Lyra let out a soft huff, a sound of contentment. She settled down beside Alara, her flank pressed against Alara's leg, her large head resting on Alara's knee. The cave, usually so quiet, seemed to hold its breath. Alara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of Lyra's body soak into her. This was more than just a rescued animal. This was a connection, a bond forged in the crucible of vulnerability and care. Then it happened. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor beneath her hand. It was a delicate ripple, like a stone skipped across a still pond. Alara's eyes flew open. She stilled her breathing, focusing every ounce of her awareness on the sensation. Another flutter, stronger this time, a tiny kick that vibrated through Lyra's fur and into Alara's palm. A gasp escaped Alara's lips. a sound of pure, unadulterated wonder. A tear, hot and unexpected, traced a path down her cheek. It was so small, so fragile, yet so undeniably alive. The joy that surged through her was overwhelming, a tidal wave that washed away the lingering fear, the bitter memories of exile, the gnawing loneliness. This was life, Ariu and precious, held within her very hand. Alara's fingers instinctively spread wider, cupping Lyra's belly with reverence. She could feel the faint, rhythmic thump of the pup's tiny heart, a secret symphony playing just for her. Lyra watched her, her amber eyes soft, filled with an ancient knowing. In that moment, Alara felt a connection that transcended species, transcended circumstance. It was a primal bond, a silent promise whispered between two souls. She was not just a healer, she was a protector, a witness to a miracle. She stayed there for a long time, her hand resting on Lyra's belly, feeling the sporadic, gentle movements of the unborn pup. The raw joy mingled with a fierce protectiveness. This pup, this life, was intertwined with her own fate now. She had saved its mother, nurtured her back to health, and now she felt the stirrings of its very existence. It was a profound intimacy, a shared secret that bound them together more tightly than any chain. The afternoon light faded, casting long, dancing shadows across the cave walls. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow on Lyra's silver fur and Alara's auburn hair. Lyra shifted again, nestling her head more comfortably into Alara's lap. Her eyes, heavy with trust, slowly closed. The gentle weight of her head, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the faint internal dance of the pup beneath Alara's hand. It all spoke of a peace Alara had not known in years. Alara looked down at the magnificent wolf, a creature of power and grace, now utterly vulnerable and trusting in her care. A rare, genuine smile spread across Alara's face, a smile that reached her emerald eyes and softened the lines of worry etched there. The loneliness of her exile had been a cold, stark wilderness, but here in this hidden cave with this regal wolf and her unborn pup, Alara had found a warmth that promised loyalty, a silent understanding, and a secret that would forever bind their destinies. The quiet of the whispering wilds, Alara's constant companion, felt particularly fragile that morning. A fine mist still clung to the ancient oak leaves, making the air cool and damp against her skin. She carried her worn wooden bucket, heading towards the small stream that provided their fresh water. Lyra rested soundly in the cave, her breathing deep and even, a testament to the safety Alara had painstakingly built around them. For a week, this hidden pocket of the forest had been their sanctuary. Each step Alara took was deliberate, her bare feet silent on the mossy ground. She was acutely aware of her surroundings, a habit born of necessity and years of living on the edge. The familiar scent of damp earth and pine needles filled her lungs, a comforting aroma that usually eased the gnawing loneliness in her heart. Today, however, a subtle shift in the forest breath pricked at her senses, a faint metallic tang beneath the natural green. It was a scent that did not belong, a shadow in the tapestry of the wilderness. Her eyes, usually quick to spot a ripe berry or a healing herb, now scanned the ground with a hunter's intensity. She knew these woods intimately, every fallen branch and winding root. Then she saw it, a depression in the soft earth near the stream's edge, too deep and too broad for a deer. Certainly not a rabbit. The shape was unmistakably lupine, but larger, heavier than any lone wolf she had ever encountered. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her fingers locked around the handle of the bucket, cold and slick. A shiver traced its way down her spine. This was not the print of a wild, wandering wolf. This print spoke of strength, of purpose, of something heavier than just a creature of the forest. It hinted at a pack, a disciplined force. Her mind, usually calm and analytical in the face of nature, began to spin. The thorn pack. The words echoed in the back of her thoughts, a chilling whisper. She had seen their distinctive mark on Lyra's collar, the rearing wolf beneath the crescent moon. This print, large and deliberate, was too close to her haven. She knelt, her knees sinking slightly into the soft earth, her hand hovering just above the track. The edges were sharp, fresh, pressed into the soil within the last few hours. A cold dread began to coil in her stomach, tightening with each beat of her heart. For 7 days she had held Lyra close, protected her, poured all her healing knowledge into her recovery. For 7 days, she had dared to believe they were truly safe, tucked away from the relentless search that must surely be underway. Now, that illusion shattered. Her gaze darted around, searching for more signs. And there they were, not one, but several, leading away from the stream, towards the north, towards a familiar rocky outcrop where thick brambles offered good cover. Her sanctuary, their hidden cave, lay in that direction. A terrible certainty settled over her. They had been here. They were close. The realization pressed against her chest, stealing her air. Alara knew she should turn back, run, but a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to understand the extent of the threat, pulled her forward. She left her bucket by the stream, its presence now an irrelevant detail. Each step she took was lighter, quieter, her senses heightened to an almost painful degree. She moved like a phantom through the undergrowth, her eyes sweeping the forest floor for any telltale sign, her ears straining for the slightest sound beyond the rustling leaves and the distant murmur of the stream. Then she heard it. Voices, low, guttural, distinctly human. They were men, and their tones were harsh, impatient. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the stillness of the woods. She dropped to her hands and knees, crawling silently behind a thick clump of ancient ferns, their broad fronds offering a screen. Peeking through the leaves, she saw them. 3 figures, large and imposing even at a distance, dressed in dark leathers, their faces grim. Wolves, she knew, in their human form. Thornpack warriors. One of them, a man with a heavy beard and eyes like chips of flint, spoke, his voice carrying clearly on the cool morning air. Still nothing. The king grows impatient. His rage burns like a wildfire. Alara's breath caught. The king, Kalen Thorn. The Alpha King. The mate of the wolf she was harboring. A fresh wave of fear, colder and sharper than before, washed over her. She knew the stories of the Alpha King, his fierce devotion, his unwavering strength, his ruthless justice. She knew what he would do to anyone who stood between him and what was his. And Lyra, the Alpha Queen, was undeniably his. Another warrior, younger, his face etched with exhaustion, responded, We've scoured every inch of this wretched forest for weeks. It's a ghost hunt. We find nothing. He kicked a loose stone, his frustration palpable. His Majesty believes she's still alive, the first man growled, his voice laced with unshakable conviction. He feels it in his bones, and if she's alive, someone is keeping her stir. Someone is hiding her from him. Alara's stomach clenched. Someone is hiding her. The words were a direct accusation, a sentence passed before any trial. She was that someone. She, the exiled healer, the gentle protector of animals, was now an unwitting traitor in the eyes of the most powerful pack in the lands. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead, despite the chill in the air. Her fingers dug into the damp earth, seeking an anchor against the swirling panic. When we find the one who dares to defy the king, the third warrior, his face scarred and hard, spoke slowly, his voice a low menace. There will be no mercy. None. To harbor the queen, to keep her from her mate, from her pack, from her pup, it is an act of war. A chilling tremor ran through Alara's entire body. From her pup, the unborn life within Lyra, the tiny flutter she had felt beneath her palm, was not just precious to Lyra, but to the entire Moonstone Kingdom. It was the future, the continuation of the royal line. And she, Alara, was unknowingly holding that future hostage. The weight of her secret, which had felt like a profound responsibility, now felt like a crushing burden, a death sentence waiting to be carried out. She thought of her own exile, the bitter injustice of it. Accused of defying her clan's ways by tending to an injured wolf, she had been cast out, left to fend for herself in these wild lands. Her compassion, her gift, had been her undoing then. Now it was about to lead her to a far more terrible fate. The Thornpack's justice was swift and brutal, a legend whispered around campfires. She knew they would not listen to her pleas, her explanations. They would cede only defiance, only betrayal. The grizzled warrior leaned against a thick tree trunk, his eyes sweeping the forest with a weary but sharp gaze. The king has ordered us to extend our search even deeper into these cursed whispering wilds. He suspects a rogue, someone with a twisted heart, might seek to gain favor or simply cause chaos. Alara pressed herself further into the ferns, willing herself to be invisible, to disappear into the very fabric of the forest. Her heart was a frantic bird trapped in her chest, beating against her ribs with bruising force. Every nerve ending in her body screamed for her to flee, to protect Lyra, to protect herself. But the thought of leaving Lyra, still recovering, still so vulnerable, was unbearable. Any wolf who refuses to cooperate, any human who harbors secrets, will face the king's wrath, the second warrior added, his voice grim. He cares for nothing but finding his mate. Anyone who hinders that search will regret the day they drew breath. The words were like daggers, each one piercing Alara's fragile sense of security. She had not sought to hinder Kaelin's search. She had only sought to heal, to protect, to offer solace to a creature in distress. But intentions, she knew, mattered little in the face of royal decree and a desperate king's grief. Her actions, born of pure compassion, would be twisted into an act of malicious defiance. A rustle in the leaves nearby made her flinch, her muscles tensing. It was only a squirrel chattering indignantly at her intrusion, but the sound sent a fresh jolt of terror through her. What if they heard her? What if they were closer than she thought? The memory of their wolf forms, the raw power she knew they possessed, flashed in her mind. Her small knife, her herbs, her wits. They were nothing against the might of the Thorn Pack. She imagined them finding Lyra in the cave. Lyra, weakened and vulnerable. Alara herself caught red-handed. The images that flashed through her mind were stark, vivid, and terrifying. She saw their cold, hard faces, the glint of their weapons, the swift, merciless judgment. A silent sob caught in her throat. She could not let that happen. Not to Lyra, and certainly not to the pup. The warriors continued their grim discussion for a few more tense minutes, their voices fading slightly as they began to move further along the trail, deeper into the forest, away from Alara's immediate hiding spot, but still alarmingly close to the cave. Alara stayed motionless, holding her breath, until the last whisper of their voices had vanished into the vastness of the woods. Only then, with an almost agonizing slowness, did she begin to extricate herself from her hiding place. Her limbs felt stiff, her body trembling uncontrollably. Every muscle ached with the effort of remaining still, of suppressing her fear. Her mouth was dry, her tongue thick. She pushed herself up, her eyes wide and unfocused for a moment, before they snapped back to the immediate, terrifying reality. The air still felt heavy with their presence, with the weight of their words. The scent of pine and damp earth was now mixed with the acrid smell of fear, her own fear. There was no time to fetch the bucket. There was no time for anything but action. She had to get back to Lyra. She had to warn her. She had to find a way to protect them both. The thought propelled her forward, a desperate urgency overriding her fear-induced paralysis. She turned and began to run, not with her usual fluid grace, but with a frantic, stumbling haste, her heart a drum pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Branches whipped at her face. Thorns snagged her deerskin tunic, but she barely registered the pain. Her focus was singular, absolute. Lyra, the cave, safety. The words of the warriors echoed in her ears, a chilling mantra of threats and impending doom. No mercy, act of war, the king's wrath. The familiar path to the cave, usually a source of comfort, now felt like a treacherous gauntlet. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of terror through her. She imagined them behind her, tracking her, their keen senses already picking up her scent, her panicked movements. Her breath came in ragged gasps, burning in her lungs. Her legs ached, but she pushed harder, faster, driven by an almost primal instinct to protect the innocent life she had taken under her wing. Finally, the familiar rock face of their hidden sanctuary came into view. She scrambled inside, her vision blurring, her chest heaving. The cool, quiet darkness of the cave, usually so welcoming, now felt like a trap, its mouth gaping open, vulnerable. Lyra lay where she had left her, a magnificent silver-gray form curled gracefully on a bed of soft moss. Her amber eyes, usually so peaceful, now flickered open, instantly sensing Alara's frantic energy. Alara collapsed beside her, gasping for air, her body shaking uncontrollably. Her hands, still trembling, reached out to Lyra, stroking the soft fur of her neck, a silent plea for understanding, for comfort. Lyra responded with a soft whimper, nudging Alara's hand with her nose. Her eyes filled with a deep, intuitive concern. She knew. She understood Alara's terror without a single word being spoken. Tears, hot and stinging, welled in Alara's eyes, finally spilling down her dirt-streaked cheeks. She buried her face in Lyra's warm fur, clinging to her, seeking solace in her presence. They were here, she choked out, her voice raw with fear. The Thorn Pack. They are searching for you. They know someone is hiding you. Lyra's body tensed beneath her touch, a low growl rumbling deep in her chest. Her eyes, usually so gentle, now held a fierce, protective glint. She understood the gravity of Alara's words, the imminent danger, the shared secret which had bound them together in a fragile peace, now threatened to tear their world apart. Alara pulled back, wiping the tears from her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to regain some semblance of control. Panic was a luxury they could not afford. They needed to think, to act. They said there would be no mercy for anyone harboring you. They called it an act of war. Lyra's ears flattened slightly, a subtle shift that spoke volumes of her comprehension and her own fear, not for herself but for the human who had saved her. She nudged Alara again, a desperate gesture of reassurance, as if to say, "We are together." Alara looked into Lyra's amber eyes, seeing not just fear, but also a deep, unwavering trust. This wolf, this queen, had placed her life and the life of her unborn pup into Alara's hands. The responsibility, once a quiet weight, now felt impossibly heavy. Their sanctuary was compromised. Their hidden haven was no longer safe. The relentless search of Alpha King Kalen had finally reached their doorstep. They must move. That much was brutally clear. Remaining here was a death sentence for Alara and a terrifying risk for Lyra and the pup. But the thought of leaving the only safe place she had known since her exile, the only home she had managed to carve out for herself, was daunting. The Whispering Wilds were vast, but Kalen's trackers were relentless. Alara looked at Lyra, her eyes filled with a desperate resolve. They must move. But where could they go that Kalen's relentless search wouldn't find them? A low whimper, unlike any sound Alara had heard from Lyra before, pulled her from a fitful sleep. The air in the cave, usually cool and still, now felt charged with a different kind of tension. Alara's emerald eyes, accustomed to the dimness, found Lyra shifting restlessly on her bed of moss and dried leaves. A tremor ran through the large wolf's silver-gray fur. Her magnificent head was lowered, her amber eyes, usually so calm and knowing, now clouded with a raw, primal discomfort. Alara's breath caught in her throat. She recognized this struggle, the deep guttural noises, the restless pacing within the small confines of their shelter. It was the unmistakable onset of labor. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced through her exhaustion. She had seen animals birth countless times in the wilds, aided many a doe or ewe, but this was different. This was the Alpha Queen, carrying the future of a powerful pack, far from the safety of her mate and the skilled hands of her pack healers. A wave of panic, cold and relentless, washed over Alara. Her stomach clenched. Every instinct screamed at her to help, to soothe, to alleviate the pain. Yet a deeper, more profound fear began to bloom in her chest. Lyra needed more than gentle words and herbal infusions now. She needed a calm, secure environment. She needed the strength and presence of her mate. She needed the specialized care only her pack could provide. Alara's own limited knowledge, while sufficient for a wild creature, felt terrifyingly inadequate for the queen of a wolf pack. She knelt beside Lyra, her hand hovering, hesitant. A low growl rumbled in Lyra's throat, not of aggression, but of deep-seated pain. The wolf's muscles rippled beneath her fur. Alara watched, helpless, as another wave of contractions seized Lyra's body. The cave suddenly felt too small, too isolated. The silence that had once offered solace now echoed with Lyra's strained breathing, making Alara's own heart pound like a drum against her ribs. This was no longer about keeping Lyra safe from the outside world. This was about the fragile life within Lyra, a life that was now in peril because of Alara's continued concealment. Her hands trembled as she stroked Lyra's head, feeling the warmth of feverish skin. Lyra's distress was palpable, a heavy cloak settling over Alara. The deep emotional bond they had forged, the unspoken promise of protection, now weighed on her with an unbearable pressure. She had protected Lyra fiercely, hiding her from the relentless search, convinced it was the right path. Now that path led to this moment of intense suffering. Alara remembered the stories from her own clan, hushed tales of difficult births, of pups lost because help arrived too late. She had seen it herself, the tragic outcome when a mother was left alone, without experienced guidance. The thought of that happening to Lyra, to Kaelin's pup, was a torment Alara could not bear. Her own life, her freedom, her exile, all seemed insignificant compared to the precious lives lying before her. A profound sense of responsibility settled over her, chilling her to the bone. The flickering light from her small fire cast long, dancing shadows on the cave walls, distorting them into monstrous shapes. Each shadow seemed to mock her, reminding her of the dangers outside, the very dangers she had sought to avoid. But the true danger was now inside, within these very walls, threatening the lives she swore to protect. Lyra whimpered again, a softer sound this time, her head turning to press against Alara's side. It was an appeal, a silent plea for help that Alara understood with every fiber of her being. She rose, pacing the small cave, her thoughts a tumultuous storm. The decision was no longer a question of if, but how. How could she possibly reveal Lyra's location to Kaelin, the Alpha King, the very man whose wrath she feared most, the man whose pack had exiled her, whose patrols searched for anyone harboring his mate, even threatening retribution? Her heart ached with the knowledge that this choice would inevitably lead her back to the world she had been banished from, a world that had cast her out for her compassionate nature. Her exile had been a harsh lesson in the cruelty of her own kind. She had been deemed a danger, an anomaly, for daring to protect a creature deemed lesser. Now, that very compassion demanded she risk everything. The memory of the thorn-packed threats of Kaelin's growl echoing through the forest sent a shiver down her spine. They would not understand. They would see her as a kidnapper, a deceiver, someone who had hidden their queen. They would not see the weeks of gentle care, the silent bond, the selfless protection. Tears, hot and sudden, blurred her vision. They were tears of fear, yes, but also of a deep, aching sadness. She had found a fragile peace in these wilds, a purpose in healing the injured and forgotten. This decision meant shattering that peace, stepping directly into the path of a storm. She knew the whispers, the accusations that would follow, the judgment she would face. But looking at Lyra, so vulnerable and in pain, those fears began to recede, replaced by an even more powerful surge of maternal instinct, a fierce protectiveness that transcended species. Alara ran her fingers through her tangled auburn hair, pulling at the knots as if to pull clarity from her own confused mind. There had to be a way to get Lyra to have her mate without condemning herself, without being torn apart by Kaelin's pack. But every option seemed fraught with peril. To approach the pack directly would be suicide. To leave Lyra to find her own way was unthinkable. She knew Kaelin's search was relentless, his patrols closer than ever. They were already too close. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the cave, mixed now with the stronger, more acrid scent of fear and exertion from Lyra. Alara took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm her racing pulse. She closed her eyes, picturing Kaelin's stern face, his intense, icy eyes. He was a king, fierce and unyielding. What mercy would he show a mere exile, a stranger found with his beloved queen? The answer resonated with a chilling certainty. None. He would likely show none. Yet Lyra's need was paramount. The pup, small and unseen, a tiny life depending on Alara's courage. She remembered the faint flutter beneath her palm, the incredible sensation of life within Lyra's belly. That tiny life demanded a chance. It deserved to be born surrounded by love and safety, not in a cold, dark cave with only a frightened exile for comfort. Alara's gaze drifted to Lyra's neck, to the royal moonstone collar, its faint glow seeming to pulse with urgency. It was the symbol of Lyra's identity, the proof that she was not just any wolf, but the Alpha Queen. That collar was the key to everything. She had held this secret close, a heavy burden that had become even heavier with each passing day. Now it was a secret she had to willingly give up, had to expose, even if it meant her own destruction. The thought made her heart ache with a profound sadness. She had hoped for a different ending, perhaps a quiet return, a peaceful handover. But fate, it seemed, had other, more dramatic plans. Liara's pain was worsening. Her body shook with a force that made the small cave tremor. Alara knew she could not delay. The decision, though agonizing, was clear. She had to lead Kalen to his mate. She had to find a way to bridge the chasm between her hidden world and his powerful one. It meant stepping from the shadows into the blinding light of the Alpha King's fury. It meant facing the very forces that had cast her out, the very people who saw her as an outcast, an enemy. But there was no other choice. Lyra's life and the life of her pup depended on Alara's willingness to sacrifice her own. A strange calm began to settle over her, a quiet resolve forged in the crucible of fear and love. Her hands, though still trembling slightly, moved with purpose. She began to gather her meager belongings, her satchel of herbs, her small carving knife. She would need them. Not for herself, perhaps, but for Lyra. She took one last look around the small cave that had been her sanctuary, her safe haven from the world. It was a home she was about to leave, perhaps forever. The air grew heavy with the smell of coming rain, a distant rumble of thunder echoing through the mountains. Nature, it seemed, was mirroring the turmoil within Alara's soul. She had survived alone for so long, relying only on her wits and her connection to the wild. Now she was willingly stepping into a storm of human and wolf pack politics, a storm that could easily consume her, but the image of Lyra's pained eyes, the silent plea, burned in her mind, eclipsing all other fears. She would do this. She would face the Alpha King. With a heavy heart, Alara made a perilous decision, knowing that she must somehow reveal Lyra's location to Kalen, even if it meant facing the wrath of the Alpha King. A cold dread settled deep in Alara's bones, heavier than any winter night. Her decision was made, yet the weight of it threatened to crush her spirit. She had chosen to lead them here, to bring the Alpha King's wrath down upon her own head, all for the sake of a pup she had never met and a queen she had sworn to protect. The faint sounds of Lyra's strained breaths echoed from the cave mouth, each one a stark reminder of the ticking clock. Alara knew she could not hide the queen any longer, but the thought of facing Kalen Thorn, the merciless Alpha King, twisted her stomach into knots. Her fingers, usually steady, trembled as she reached for a slender branch of silver birch. The bark, smooth and cool beneath her touch, offered little comfort. This was not a random act. Every step, every disturbance she created would need to be deliberate, yet subtle enough to seem natural to anyone less keen than an alpha. She needed to draw them in, but slowly without causing immediate alarm. Her exiled status, a mark of defiance and danger in the eyes of her former clan, now felt like a brand of death. She remembered the burning anger in their eyes when they cast her out, and she imagined Kalen's fury would be far greater. He sought his mate, his queen, and she, a lone exile, had dared to keep her. With a deep, shaky breath, Alara began her work. She snapped the birch branch cleanly, leaving the break jagged but not overtly artificial. The fresh scent of sap filled the cool morning air, a scent that would carry on the breeze. She then carefully dragged a heavy branch, leaving a distinct, though shallow, furrow in the damp earth, aiming it away from their hidden cave. This path had to be convincing, a false trail leading to the true one, drawing the hunters away from the immediate vicinity of Lyra. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the forest. Each deliberate action was a step closer to her own potential doom. She moved with a quiet efficiency born of years living in the wilds. Her worn deerskin leggings brushed against the undergrowth, barely making a sound. Her emerald eyes, usually soft and compassionate, now held a sharp, calculating focus. She picked a patch of crushed moss, then sprinkled a few dried leaves of moon petal, an herb whose distinctive, almost metallic scent she knew would catch a wolf's attention. It was not a scent for medicine, but a marker, a scent note out of place in this particular corner of the forest. She imagined Kalen, his nose to the ground, his icy eyes scanning for any sign. Would he see through her deception, or would her desperate plea for discovery be answered? The sun climbed higher, filtering through the dense canopy in shifting patterns of light and shadow. The forest felt alive around her, the chirping of birds, the distant rush of water. All seemed to heighten the tension within her. She worked for what felt like an eternity, weaving a delicate web of clues through the trees, always ensuring the main path moved steadily towards the Shadowfen River, the place where she had first found Lyra. It was a risky strategy, but she hoped the familiarity of the scent, leading back to where his search began, might lure him into a false sense of confirmation. She wanted him to feel he was finding his own way, not being led. Finally, she turned back, leaving a final, more obvious broken branch pointing towards the path she had created. The subtle scent of her own fear clung to her, a cold, bitter aroma she knew Kalen would easily detect. She returned to the cave, her legs aching, her muscles strained from the intense, quiet effort. Lyra lay curled on the soft bed of moss, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The pain was etched on her wolf face, a silent plea that tore at Alar's heart. The pup was coming, and time was truly running out. Alara sank beside her, stroking Lyra's silver fur, whispering words of encouragement, trying to soothe the fear that was both Lyra's and her own. Hours later, the forest's quiet hum shifted. A distant snap of a twig, too heavy for a deer, too deliberate for a squirrel, sent a jolt through Alara. Her head snapped up, her emerald eyes wide, listening. Lyra, sensing the change, whimpered softly, her head lifting slightly. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, now layered with something else. The sharp, musky aroma of many wolves, drawing closer, a scent that prickled Alara's skin with alarm. It was the scent of power, of purpose, of a relentless huntress. This was it. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, making her feel lightheaded. Alpha King Kalen Thorn moved through the whispering wilds like a shadow, a relentless force of nature driven by a singular purpose. His pack followed, disciplined and quiet, but Kalen was always at the front, his senses honed to an impossible degree. Each gust of wind carried faint whispers. Each disturbed leaf held a story. His initial hope, sparked by Lyra's scent near the Shadowfen River, had slowly faded into a gnawing despair as the days wore on. But then, this new trail. It was elusive, almost teasing. His powerful paws patted silently over the forest floor. He caught the subtle, almost imperceptible snap of a fresh branch. It wasn't a random break, a small, almost imperceptible furrow in the earth. He paused, his dark eyes scanning the path ahead, his nose flaring. The scent of moon petal, light and unusual, wafted from a patch of disturbed moss. It was not a common herb in this area, and its placement felt deliberate. He growled low in his chest. Was someone playing a game, leading him on a wild chase? His mind raced, his frustration a hot, bitter taste in his mouth. Silas, moving gracefully behind him despite his age, observed the Alpha King. He saw the flicker of suspicion in Kalen's eyes, the way his jaw tightened. "The trail is subtle, my king," Silas murmured, his voice a quiet rumble. "But consistent. Someone wants us to find something." Or someone. Kalen merely grunted, his focus unbroken. He pressed forward, his frustration warring with a fragile, desperate hope. The scent of Lyra, faint and distant at first, seemed to be growing stronger along this new, strange path. It was mixed with another scent, unfamiliar, human, yet not hostile in the way a rival would smell. It was hot and earthy and carried a hint of fear. The trail led them deeper into the old growth, where ancient oaks towered, their branches heavy with moss. The air grew colder, the light dimmer. Kalen followed the broken twigs, the deliberately scuffed earth, the faint, lingering herbal scent. He knew this forest like the back of his paw, and these markers were alien, clearly placed. But Lyra's scent was now undeniable, stronger than it had been in days, mixed with a faint, sweet aroma of something new, something fragile. His heart began to thump with a heavy, anxious beat. Was it a trap or a desperate plea? He pushed faster, his powerful legs eating up the ground. The pack spread out, forming a silent wedge behind him. The scent of Lyra was now potent, overwhelming. It was close. In his mind, he pictured her, weakened, perhaps injured, waiting for him. The thought fueled his desperate surge. He burst through a thick curtain of weeping willows, his muscles taut, ready for anything. The small glade was a circle of quiet, bathed in the soft, dappled light filtering through the canopy. And there, in the center, was Lyra. She lay on a bed of moss, her magnificent silver-gray fur matted with sweat, her body heaving with visible effort. A low, guttural moan escaped her throat, a sound of profound pain. And beside her, kneeling her back to the approaching wolves, was a slender human figure, her auburn hair a tangled mess, her hands gentle as they stroked Lyra's forehead. Kalen froze, his powerful frame suddenly rigid. His world narrowed to this single impossible sight. Lyra, his mate, the queen he had searched for relentlessly, lying in agony, in labor. A gasp escaped his throat, a raw, choked sound. Relief so overwhelming it threatened to buckle his knees, washed over him, a tidal wave drowning out all other thoughts. She was alive. She was here. His eyes, wide with shock and this sudden, crushing relief, locked onto Lyra. He saw her pain, her exhaustion, the unmistakable signs of impending birth. Then his gaze snapped to the woman beside her, the stranger, the human. The one who had led him here with her strange, subtle trail. Her hands, stained with earth and what looked like Lyra's sweat, were still tenderly cradling his mate's head. A silent, furious question burned in his icy depths as he saw his beloved mate in the care of an unknown, exiled woman. The glade was suddenly filled with the heavy silence of confrontation, broken only by Lyra's pained gasp and the frantic pounding of Alara's heart. A primal roar tore from Kalen's throat, a sound born of sheer, terrifying relief and blinding rage. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat demanding action. He saw Lyra, his mate, writhing on the damp earth of the glade, her fur matted, her body straining. The sight of her pain eclipsed everything else. His furious gaze, fixed just moments before on the slender woman kneeling beside Lyra, now blurred. He lunged forward, his powerful frame covering the distance in 3 swift strides, dropping to his knees beside his beloved queen. The scent of Lyra's distress filled the air, acrid and overwhelming, mingling with the fresh earth and the faint, unfamiliar sweetness of herbs. Kalen reached for her, his large hands hovering, unsure how to help. His mind, usually a fortress of cold logic, was now a maelstrom of fear and love. He felt a tremor in Lyra's body, a deep, guttural moan escaping her lips, and his own strength threatened to abandon him. He glanced back, a flicker of his earlier anger returning, at the woman who knelt nearby, her emerald eyes watching him with an unnerving calm. Alara felt her blood run cold, a sharp needle of terror piercing her resolve. Kalen's presence was a physical force, a storm of raw power and barely contained fury. His shadowed face, the set of his jaw, the intensity of his gaze, every line spoke of danger. Yet Lyra's pained whimpers were louder, more urgent. Her instincts, honed by years of caring for injured creatures, took over. She had to push past her fear. Lyra needed her. The pup needed her. "She is close," Alara's voice was soft, surprisingly steady, cutting through the heavy silence that had fallen over the assembled pack members. They stood frozen at the edge of the glade, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe, their weapons still clutched in their hands. "Too close for your anger, Alpha King. She needs your strength, not your fury." Kalen's head snapped towards her, his ice-blue eyes blazing. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest, a warning. He was not accustomed to being spoken to in such a manner, especially by an outsider, a lone woman found with his missing queen. But the words, direct and unwavering, held a truth he could not ignore. Lyra cried out again, a sharp, piercing sound that tore through him. His mate, his life, was in agony. He turned back to Lyra, his large hand gently stroking her head, trying to convey comfort. "What do I do?" His voice was hoarse, a stark contrast to his usual commanding tone. It was a question he had never expected to ask, especially not of this stranger. The helplessness was a bitter taste in his mouth. Alara moved closer, her movements fluid and practiced, her fear still a tight knot in her stomach, but now overshadowed by her purpose. Hold her head. Speak to her. Tell her she is safe. Tell her you are here. She instructed, her gaze never leaving Lyra's strained face. Help me keep her calm. The fear can hinder the process. Kalen nodded, a slow, stiff movement, his eyes wide with a confusion he rarely displayed. He followed her instructions, his rough voice a deep murmur against Lyra's ear, a desperate litany of endearments and promises. He felt his mate lean into his touch, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The soft, unfamiliar scent of the herbs Alara had placed around Lyra, mixed with the dampness of the earth and the raw, earthy smell of the birthing process, slowly began to anchor him. He found a strange comfort in the firm, confident way Alara moved, her small hands ministering to Lyra. Alara worked quickly, her fingers nimble and skilled. She checked Lyra's progress, murmuring encouragement, her touch gentle but firm. She instructed Kalen on how to support Lyra, how to stroke her fur, how to help her find moments of calm between the powerful waves of contractions. Each instruction was clear, concise, and utterly practical. Kalen, the fearsome Alpha King, found himself obeying, his initial fury slowly melting away into a profound awe and a growing, unsettling respect. He watched her, truly watched her for the first time, noticing the small scar above her eyebrow, the determined set of her mouth, the unwavering focus in her eyes. There was no deceit there, only a deep, almost painful compassion. The minutes stretched into an eternity, marked by Lyra's groans and Alara's soft, persistent coaching. The air in the glade grew thick with anticipation, with the primal energy of new life struggling to enter the world. Kalen felt Lyra's body tense again, a powerful shudder running through her. He held her tighter, his own muscles aching with the effort of simply being present, of bearing witness to her pain. He had faced countless battles, stood against hordes of enemies, but this quiet, agonizing struggle was far more terrifying. He felt completely powerless, a sensation he despised, yet he was forced to rely on the competence of the woman he had wanted to condemn. Breathe with me, Lyra, Alara coached, her voice a soothing balm. Almost there. Feel the push. Let it guide you. She wiped a sheen of sweat from Lyra's brow, her touch surprisingly tender. Alara felt a strange sense of belonging in this moment, a fleeting connection to this powerful family. Her own past, her exile, the years of cold loneliness, all receded, replaced by the immediate, life-affirming urgency of birth. She felt a deep, warm ache in her chest, a feeling she hadn't known since she was a child. It was the joy of being truly useful, of bringing comfort in life into the world. Then a wave of profound energy swept through Lyra's body, a final powerful surge, a soft, wet sound, and then a tiny whimper. Kalen's breath hitched. His eyes, fixed on Lyra's flank, saw it, a small, dark bundle, wet and trembling, emerge into the world. A tiny life. His pup. A gasp rippled through the gathered pack members. A wave of immense relief, almost palpable, washed over the glade. Kalen felt tears sting his eyes, hot and unexpected. He had never imagined such a profound, soul-shattering joy. Lyra, panting heavily, turned her head, her amber eyes soft with maternal love, nudging the small bundle with her nose. Alara moved quickly, gently clearing the pup's airways, her fingers surprisingly deft with the tiny creature. Its first cries, small and reedy, filled the air, a sound more beautiful than any melody Kalen had ever heard. The fear, the anger, the desperation, all of it evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming sense of wonder and gratitude. He felt Lyra's gentle nudge, a silent invitation, and carefully, reverently, he lowered his head to nuzzle the newborn pup. The soft, warm fur, the faint, sweet scent of new life, filled him with a fierce, protective love. He watched as Alara, with quiet competence, helped Lyra with the afterbirth, her movements respectful and professional. His mate was exhausted but safe, and their pup, a miracle, lay nestled beside her. As the initial euphoria began to settle, A different kind of awareness began to dawn in Kalen's mind. He looked at Lyra, so peaceful now, licking her newborn. His gaze dropped to her neck, to the familiar, dark leather collar. The polished moonstone, glowing faintly even in the dim pre-dawn light, bore the unmistakable crest of the Thorn Pack. It had been there all along, a beacon of truth. He had been searching for her for weeks, across every inch of his territory, believing her captured, hurt, or worse. Yet here she was, in a hidden glade, cared for by this exiled woman. And Alara, this soft-spoken healer, had not only saved his mate from the river's cruel grasp, but had also ensured the safe arrival of his child. The weight of his pack's despair, the relentless, fruitless search, the gnawing fear that had consumed him, all had been for naught, or rather had been diverted by this woman's quiet mercy. Alara, sensing his gaze, straightened up, her work done. Her hands were smeared with earth and birthing fluids, her hair was escaping its braid, but her eyes, though weary, held a quiet dignity. She stepped back a pace, giving Kalen and Lyra space, her own heart full of a strange mix of relief and trepidation. She had done her part. Now came the reckoning. She knew the consequences of harboring a royal, of withholding such information from a king. Her exile had taught her that even good intentions could be twisted into defiance. Kalen carefully shifted, pulling the tiny pup closer to Lyra's warmth, his eyes never leaving the small, perfect creature. He reached out and gently touched Lyra's head, a silent message of love and profound relief passing between them. Then slowly he raised his head, his gaze finally settling on Alara. The fury was gone, replaced by a complex mix of emotions Alara couldn't quite decipher. There was gratitude, certainly, but also a lingering confusion. A deep question etched into the lines of his face. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with unspoken words and untold secrets. The distant cries of morning birds began to filter through the trees, announcing the dawn. The pack members at the glade's edge remained silent, watching their alpha, waiting for his command, for an explanation. Kalen's voice, when it came, was hoarse, thick with the raw emotion of the past few hours. It was not the commanding roar of an alpha king, but the quiet, searching tone of a father and a mate who had almost lost everything. He cradled his newborn pup, a symbol of his greatest joy, while gazing at his recovering mate, a testament to his deepest love. He then looked directly into Alara's eyes, the intensity of his stare both unnerving and compelling. "Why?" he asked, the single word hanging in the crisp morning air. His voice was a low rumble, filled with a mixture of disbelief and dawning understanding. "Why did you save her? And why hide her?" Kalen's questions cut through the glade's cool air. Why did you save her? And why hide her? Fear replaced Alara's fragile peace. Her throat tightened, but her gaze held the Alpha King's intense eyes. Lyra, weak but aware, nudged Alara's hand. Pine and fresh earth mingled with the metallic tang of new life. Alara took a shallow breath, cool air burning her lungs. This moment could mean her death. "I was cast out," she began, voice gaining strength though trembling. "My clan, the Greycliffs, banished me for saving a wolf caught in a snare." The memory stung. She recalled the cold wind and harsh words as they drove her from their lands. They called it defiance, unnatural. That I harbored beasts. A bitter taste filled her mouth. The old wound of injustice remained raw. They recoiled from her as if compassion were a disease. "But I cannot turn away from suffering. It is not in my nature." She spoke with quiet conviction, her hand on Lyra's warm fur, drawing strength. "I see them," Alara continued, voice steadier now. "Not just animals, but beings with fear, pain, and spirits that feel as deeply as our own. My healer mother called it a gift. Others called it a curse." She recalled her clan leader's fear. "When I found Lyra in the Shadowfen River, struggling, I saw pure terror. Her cries pierced my soul." She described the chilling water, Lyra's desperate thrashing, the primal urge to save her. Her hands, marked from the birth, moved as she spoke of Lyra's slick fur. The new pup whimpered, drawing Kalen's eye, a reminder of vulnerability. Kalen watched, his fierce inquiry softening to understanding. He saw honesty and vulnerability in her emerald eyes. Lyra, sensing the truth, nudged Alara aside, her amber eyes fixed on Kalen, silently confirming Alara's words. The clean moonstone collar shimmered against Lyra's fur. Kalen remembered his pack's rigid rules, their fear of outsiders, the old mistrust. This woman defied those lines, yet her gift was strength, not weakness. When I pulled her from the river, Alara continued, voice softer, I saw the moonstone. I recognized the thorn crest. My heart nearly stopped. She paused, remembering the sudden, frightening weight of the secret. Cold dread returned. I knew who she was, the Alpha Queen. Her eyes pleaded with Kalen. But I am an exile, branded dangerous for my compassion. What would your pack do to me, a stranger, if I brought her back? They would assume the worst, that I harmed her, that I was a threat. I feared you, she whispered, a raw confession. I feared your pack. I feared what you would do to me, even for saving her. I had no one to vouch for me, no one to believe my story. She remembered the accusations from her clan, the cold stares that drove her out. That old pain still ached behind her ribs. So I hid her from your patrols, from prying eyes. I tended to her, hoping for a sign, a safe way to return her, a moment to explain. She looked at his transforming gaze, until her time came. The pup demanded to be born, and I could not wait. Her voice cracked with the weight of that choice. Kalen listened. The harshness in his eyes softened to remorse. He remembered their world's brutal justice, how quickly accusations led to violence. His own relentless search seemed cruel, a blind pursuit that nearly crushed the life he sought. He had been a force of nature, driven by a primal need he now recognized in Alara. Lyra, sensing his shift, purred low, her amber eyes fixed on Alara with profound gratitude, affirming every word. Her tail thumped once on the forest floor. Shame washed over Kalen. He had judged her, condemned her as an outsider. He had been consumed by grief and fear, blind to her quiet heroism. He saw the scars on her hands, the weariness in her eyes, and unwavering compassion. This woman, cast out, had shown more courage and empathy than many in his esteemed pack, guided only by conscience. The newborn pup, resting beside Lyra, was a stark reminder of the life saved, the future secured. His voice, usually commanding, was now a low rumble, laced with vulnerability and awe. You saved my mate, he said, words heavy with gratitude. You saved my pup. You risked everything for them, for us. His gaze swept over Lyra and the tiny creature, then returned to Alara, seeing her truly. A quiet peace spread through the clearing, dispelling the pre-dawn chill. He stepped closer, his frame casting a shadow that no longer intimidated. Alara braced for punishment. Instead, Kalen knelt, a gesture that shocked her. An alpha king kneeling before an exile. The damp earth felt soft. Alara Vance, he stated, his voice authoritative yet respectful. Your former clan cast you out for your kindness, for your gift, for your inability to turn away from suffering. He gestured toward the Moonstone Citadel, a faint outline against the brightening sky. But the Moonstone Kingdom recognizes a true heart. He continued, his voice steady. We value life above all else. We value healers, those who mend body and spirit. We value those who protect the vulnerable, risking their lives. He looked at her, his icy eyes now warm with unwavering respect, piercing her fears. I offer you a place, Alara Vance, not as a captive, but as an honored member of my pack, as a healer, a protector of our future, a trusted voice within the Citadel. The words were a balm to her long aching soul. Lyra's fur against her side felt like an anchor. We need your wisdom, your hands, your heart, he finished, a quiet plea. Alara's breath hitched. Tears, hot and unexpected, welled in her eyes, blurring the glade. A tremor ran through her, not of fear, but profound relief. The crushing loneliness of years lifted, dissolving like a heavy weight. She felt lighter than ever. Her fingers instinctively clenched the small river stone she always carried, feeling its comfort. She finally felt seen, understood, accepted for who she was. A home, she whispered, the word alien and beautiful. The silence was broken only by morning birds. Her heart pounded with hope, a rhythm of rebirth. To be part of a pack again, not an outcast, but valued, needed, belonging. It was more than she had ever dared to dream, a future she had given up on. She looked at Lyra, who met her gaze with an ancient, knowing look, a silent reassurance. Then she looked at Kaelin, her former fear, now offering salvation. Her throat tightened with gratitude, not fear. Yes, she said, her voice choked but firm. Yes, Alpha King, I accept. The scent of new life, earth, and profound belonging filled her. The following days unfolded like a dream, a gentle step away from her harsh solitude. Kaelin and Lara, with their newborn pup, returned joyfully to the Moonstone Citadel. Ilara walked by their side, an honored presence. Pack members acknowledged her with respectful nods. Pine scent gave way to hearth fires, roasted meats, and the lively sounds of a thriving, welcoming pack. She found a quiet room overlooking the forested land she once roamed. Her satchel of herbs, once her only companion, now sat proudly, a symbol of her purpose and new place. The pack, initially wary, soon heard of her selfless act. Elder Silas, his wise eyes twinkling, welcomed her with gratitude. Children, curious, peeked into her dwelling, drawn by her gentle aura. She found solace helping the pack's healers, sharing wild remedies, bringing comfort to injured wolves and humans. The citadel's cool stone walls, once intimidating, now felt like a comforting embrace. The clatter of armor, soft wolf paws, and low hum of conversation blended into a symphony of belonging. Alara's bond with Lyra and Kaelin deepened daily. Lyra often sought her out, her amber eyes conveying a silent understanding. They sat together, Lyra resting her head on Alara's lap, the pup snuggled close, a tableau of peace. Kaelin, despite his duties, often found moments to speak with her. Their conversations were brief but profound, filled with unspoken respect and a shared understanding of life. He saw her as a guardian, a silent strength who saved his family and protected his pack. She became an indispensable part of their lives, a quiet anchor in the bustling court. Their bond was forged in shared peril and profound gratitude, a connection deeper than titles or bloodlines. She became part of their inner circle, a confidant, a protector of their future. The Alpha King, once terrifying, now saw her with quiet reverence for the heart beneath her simple clothes. He knew her spirit was a treasure. The air around them was warm, comforting, a stark contrast to her cold loneliness. Her heart, once a lonely rhythm, now harmonized with the citadel's pulse, a steady, joyful drum. Alara stood beside Kaelin and Lyra, afternoon sun streaming through a citadel window. The newborn pup, a tiny bundle of silver fur, slept soundly between them in a basket, a symbol of their shared future. Her heart, for the first time in years, felt entirely full, a profound peace warming her. The small scar above her left eyebrow now seemed a mark of trials overcome, a testament to her journey. She looked at Kaelin, a faint smile on his lips as he watched his family. Then her gaze fell to Lyra, whose amber eyes met hers, conveying a lifetime of gratitude and friendship. Alara had found her true place, her purpose, a destiny richer than she had imagined.